scared. I know at the beginning of the coronavirus, my family in general was really, really afraid of what was going to happen. I know my mom did not want to go outside to go grocery shopping because she was afraid that something was going to happen to her. And that is not a state of fear I want in like that's not a state of fear that should be going on. My mom should not be afraid to go grocery shopping. These attacks have not gotten the right media representation they have deserved. This has been happening since, like, as I mentioned before, February of 2020. This has been almost a year going on, and it has had zero media coverage. And these are hardworking people who deserve more. This is like their stories need to be like what I really hope that everyone can gain from this like Atlanta what happened in Atlanta is that um overall like they didn't deserve this and that we need to fight for rights for everyone. We're like people should not be scared to live in the United States.
Just like media outlets, to be honest, or at least the ones that I follow, but like some like on like Instagram or something, they were just talking about how in general there's this giant increase, but it never really got like pushed to the forefront of mainstream like news until very recently.
A smaller degree of separation between like yourself and like these individuals, and like as a personal Asian American, like Asian American woman, like you're suddenly very viscerally aware of like I think the insidious kind of like perceptions and like hatred that people have internalized, white people in particular, towards us. I think it's very dangerous. Like we'll talk about the stereotyping, right? Like historically speaking, like in terms of looking at Asian American women, we have consistently been portrayed as this very weak, docile, sexualized minority group. Like Asian women in particular, if you look at the history of like the first appearances of Asian American women in American film, the roles were usually always these very like demure but like highly sexualized, like almost like property, like objects be owned or to be utilized by white men in like these contexts. And like Asian men, same thing, like were perceived to be these very like almost like feminine, weaker, like unable to like protect their family, like just in a lot of ways like incompetent, in the context of American history. So when that image gets perpetuated throughout the course of, you know, not just American film, but like in conversation as well, right? If in a lot of ways, like the way media portrays certain people, like that often becomes truth, because if that's all you see, that's all you know. And I think in a lot of ways, like that has made its way into even modern conversation and modern media, maybe in subtler ways, but it's still definitely a very big stereotype when we talk about a lot of how even now, like I'll use anime as an example. Like I think in a lot of ways now, like because it's become so popular, anime, I mean, or like Asian TV shows, even the K-pop industry, people who do not have a personal grasp on Asian culture have started perceiving, especially women, in these ways that are very like hypersexualized. Like
I was so I listen to I follow the news a lot, and I listen to a lot of I listen to a lot of NPR, and it's just like I'm not saying predicted it, but I think there was a sense, especially that once the pandemic began, it was reaching in China, there was a sense that we're probably going to see something, and it's probably not going to be great. And then I remember basically you start seeing you get grandma people being punched, assaulted, and just realize that yep, this is happening. It's real. And, this is, this is it. This is it. It's here.
I just like outside of school, like I like it happening inside. People looked at me in different way. Maybe they feel fear, I guess, or uncomfortable because nobody knows how that happened and what to expect this situation. So they just choose to express their uncomfortability to Asian. I was passing by the bar and the bar was packed, and I think there must be a guy, really old guy, next to me. When I pass by them, they're like, oh, coronavirus coming. They're I could not look at them because I didn't know what to say, because it could be from Asia country, but that's not my fault. I don't know what happened, but that's not Asian's fault because of virus is not from the people, Asian doesn't spread it, or because like when I go to Walmart or Target, they're like, oh, who? They stop talking and just look at me. I stare at me like, whoa, like that. Even they didn't even wear the mask. They just hated me. I just feel that. So I was like, why are they so freaking hating me? I didn't do anything to you. I didn't spread the virus to you directly, go to them and like kiss them. I didn't do that. But they're like just do that. So I just ran away to Korea because I feel really scared if somebody punched me or something, because some guy, when really tall and big guy passed by me staring at me, and then I started thinking like, oh my god, maybe he's gonna punch me, he's gonna hurt me, I just that's why I ran away. I went back Korea like April. So yeah, I never regret the choice.
There, so my dad and I stopped by there, and when he got out of the car to go into the building, he got so many like dirty looks from people around us, and I was literally like scared that my dad was just about to get like literally just beat up in a Wawa parking lot, because that's just how like I guess tense it was for like Asian Americans especially.
I know there have been several times in the past year where I've like walked down the street or I've like read certain like articles, and I've genuinely felt like I can't go to certain places. I can't be by myself past a certain time, or even in broad daylight nowadays, without having fear, that someone is going to say something or do something just because we're in like the time that we are now with the coronavirus.
Being Chinese, being Asian doesn't make us any less like susceptible to the virus or any more susceptible. Like, we are all on the same playing field here. Like, we are all at the same risk of getting COVID-19. So just pointing us and being like, you are causing me to get this virus, it's just completely irrational and illogical.
There's also, even in, so for example, the Washington Post, I don't know why they allowed this op-ed headline to be published, because it was really inflammatory, but the Washington Post, right, published an op-ed that said, the election is finally over. Can we finally blame China for COVID-19, right? And I think there's this assumption that when the election finished, that then a lot of the xenophobic rhetoric would ease up. But actually, right, like this headline literally says, now that the election is over, can we please really crack down on, being xenophobic and saying it's really just China's fault that this virus has spread all over the globe. And, it's very similar actually to, and when we name certain viruses, there is always a political connotation to it, or like, there is an intention behind it. So an example is the Spanish flu.
Yeah.
The Spanish flu didn't come from Spain. It originated in Kansas in the United States. But the reason why it was called the Spanish flu was because Spain was the only country to like sit it out in World War II, like one of the only countries in like Europe to sit out World War II. And so everyone was like, we hate Spain now. And so they named it the Spanish flu. And so like there is like, so it's like, it's stuff like that, right? Like nowadays we all think of it as like the Spanish flu outbreak, but actually it never came from Spain to begin with. And so I think that like this kind of rhetoric that tries to put a location on the virus is very intentional, right? It's not just trying to assign a location of origin, it's trying to assign a location of blame, right? And so I think that those that kind of news coverage and, you know, in certain cases, just irresponsible reporting where, you know, people are deciding to run wacky op-eds or deciding to run op-eds with very inflammatory headlines, right? They do have legitimate consequences. They are hurtful towards Asian American people. And I think that unless people recognize the fact that like rhetoric about a different country, right, will affect the people in America who either come from that country or I don't know, that racists assume come from that country, right? That hurts people at home. And so I think that unless we are able to make that connection, then it's very difficult to try to understand why why violence against Asian Americans is on the rise.
It's impossible to see a headline saying the Chinese virus, the president called it the Chinese virus or the Kung flu. It's impossible to look at that headline and not develop this idea of relating this Kung flu, this Chinese virus to the people themselves, to the Chinese community. I think it is so easy based on this very biased way that the media portrayed the COVID-19 to just automatically reflect your own anxieties, your own worries, your own fears about the virus to this whole community of Asian Americans.
I think that like when we talk about too the way that rhetoric is always inevitably political, and another thing that I was going to bring up is this is a more historical example, but you know, the murder of Vincent Chin happened for very similar reasons. So you know, at the time, in Detroit, Michigan, which used to be a booming auto industry, labor unions were being absolutely destroyed, and a lot of companies were trying to go global. And there was one very specific company in Japan that was really, really starting to compete with the American auto industry, and that was Toyota. And as you know, the power of unions started to disintegrate, what it meant was that a lot of workers at these auto plants in Detroit were being laid off. And when that happened, there was so much resentment and there was so much anger because it is understandable because they were like, I don't have a job anymore. How am I going to feed my family? How am I going to take care of my loved ones? And, you know, a lot of the rhetoric was, you know, Japan sucks. They're taking away your jobs. It's all Japan's fault. There's nothing we could possibly do about it here in America. So if you're angry, you should hate Japan, right? And so that was why Vincent Chin died, was because there were these auto workers who were just laid off at the Chrysler plant and they beat him to death because they thought he was Japanese.
First off, I would say, you know, what we're going for right now, this isn't new. This isn't new. This sort of treatment of Asian Americans is, in a sense, I would say it's almost ingrained in the country. It's almost ingrained in the country's history.
It really started like around last year because there was just in general a rise in like these kinds of actions because of COVID and how it was portrayed in media, because it originated in China and then it came over here, although, you know, it also came over here from Europe. So, but like then in turn it got portrayed by, you know, some very big political figures as being from China, and that basically framed it as like being okay to like show like violence towards Asians.
Well, definitely I think the first step is definitely just talking to someone who is affected by these kinds of like hate crimes and this kind of racism, because I think learning firsthand is always the best way to learn. And if not, then even just reading about historic oppressions of Asian Americans.
Especially in this current time, take the moment to realize that even though these struggles may not apply to you personally, and yes, I'm speaking directly to white people, taking the time to like actually validate and understand that the people around you, like, you know, people who are Asian, like, you know, people who identify as parts of other minorities, just because it doesn't affect you or your family personally, like, you should care about the well-being of these people. They're your peers, they're your friends, right? They also have family just the same way that you do. take the moment and try to understand their stories. The media is not doing much talking about it, so do yourself a favor, do them a favor, like educate yourselves. And I know that sounds a lot like I'm like coming at you or attacking you or whatever, but truly take the time and like read about people's stories. These are real human beings.
I think it goes like same with both teachers and students, like just awareness and education about different cultures. And like I feel like there should be a list of stuff like to say and stuff that you should definitely not say to like people of color and like Asian people. Yeah, I think teaching in both could be similar, but I think with teachers it's different in that like if they see students like doing something that's like racist or discriminatory, I feel like they should be like, "Hey, can you not do that?" Like I think teachers just would have more of a responsibility to like over students, I guess.
Okay? This country is full of lots of minority. So if you ignore one minority problem, it's gonna affect the other problem. I feel that way. So that's why Asians should support Black minority and the other Indians or kind of like that. And the other minority as well, vice versa.
In general, do your research on the history of these people of color. Like learn what's happening in the world and the history behind it and why it is so like awful within our society for those couple of things to happen. Like for example, like the Chinese Exclusion Act or like the Japanese internment camps. Like learn about those things that we never learned in history class and take it upon yourself and learn them and then grow from them as a person and be more empathetic to those people's experiences.
This way, it's just terrible.
Yeah, well, I encourage all the Asian Americans to speak out because if you don't speak out, nobody will help you.